The United States is moving forward from a position of strength. The long war in Iraq will come to an end by the end of this year. The transition in Afghanistan is moving forward, and our troops are finally coming home.
President Obama touting what he called a string of successes in American foreign policy. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Britt Hume, Fox News senior political analyst, David Drucker from the Roll Call newspaper, Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. So Britt, and we've heard a lot of very differing arguments today. What do you make of the president's announcement? He's pulling all troops out of Iraq by the end of the year.
Well, it's a statement more in relief and achievement of a campaign promise than it was an announcement of victory. Obviously, major military progress and political progress has been made in Iraq, but as all of the generals always say when they brief on this, the gains are reversible. The structure there is shaky, and whether this will all turn out happily, we can certainly hope it will all end well, but whether this will all turn out happily or not remains to be seen.
David.
Well, I think that we're not going to know how well this all turned out and how successful it's going to be for the Obama administration for a few years until we see how the Iraqi government transitions, how it does defending itself, and Iran's influence in Iraq. Because if Iran ends up as a major player in Iraq, I think you could say diplomatic failure. However, I think it was interesting in listening to Secretary Clinton how much she said this is a validation and a part of what was also the Bush administration strategy. So clearly here Obama has no problem aligning himself with the former president.
Well, particularly because it gives him bipartisan cover in this particular case. You know, Kim, I was struck that she acted as if, this was just the natural order of things when it was just a couple of weeks ago that her State Department was negotiating to try to keep thousands of troops in. On the other hand, the Iraqi government, under pressure from its Shiite factions, especially Muqtada al-Sadr, the radical Shiite cleric, they wanted the U.S. out. They viewed this as an occupation. So how much more could Obama have done?
Look, they could have made this work. We're talking about the United States of America and the leader of the free world. Also, Maliki fundamentally did want the United States there longer. Now, he has to oversee a coalition of people that includes factions that are friendly with Iran, and they did want the United States out. But they could have made this happen if they wanted to. And in fact, the way the president announced this yesterday, I sort of thought, it did go to Britt's point. It sounded as though it was more an interest in the political outcome of this. They just decided at some point that they weren't going to do this anymore, and now it works out well. The president can say, I've fulfilled a campaign promise. Congress can go about now saying we've got money to spend on other things, and everyone's happy. But it's a very fragile situation.
Juan.
I don't think it's so fragile. I think unless you want to make a commitment, I heard some of this week, that, gee, you know what, we're still in Germany. We're still in South Korea. We're still in Japan, 40, 50 years after World War II. Why are we leaving so preemptively? It seems rash. It seems to me like we've been there 10 years. It seems to me like 4,500 Americans have died. It seems to me like 100,000 Iraqis have died, and it's time for us to pull out. Now, the question is, and this is what we're hearing this morning, is what comes next? I'm not sure that al-Maliki and the Iranians are such great friends. I think that obviously you have a Shiite-dominated South, and there's a possibility of some interference there. But, there's all sorts of complexity, beginning with Saudi Arabia's relationship with Iran. We saw that in terms of the attempted assassination. And I think that to somehow say directly there's a link between Iran now going to dominate Iraq is mistaken.
Let's turn, because it's the other big story, to Libya, with now not only the ouster of the regime, but the death of Gaddafi. Britt, does Obama's policy of leading from behind look smarter?
It looks better today than it did. My own view is, well, let me put it this way. I think there's a good argument that can be made that if we'd intervened more forcefully and forcibly sooner than we did with air power, his government and he might have been toppled very early in the game when he was on very shaky ground. And that the decision to handle it the way the administration handled it prolonged the bloodshed and prolonged the suffering and gave us this ultimate messy ending. But look, the guy's gone, and that's the single most important central fact of this, and why the president, I think, will have some ground to stand on when he claims this is a victory.
And David, you know, the Obama administration never fails to point out, and legitimately so, one, that we did this without the loss of a single American life. Two, it was cheap. Hate to put it that way, but it cost $1 billion, which, as someone said, is a rounding error in the Pentagon, and it also had the look of an organic Libyan effort rather than the U.S. toppling another regime.
Given our economic environment and given the fact that we're in Afghanistan and Iraq, I don't think there was any other way to do this but with a light footprint. I think it's a matter of style. Had this not gone well, then the leading from behind factor becomes an issue. And Americans always have a problem with the appearance of the country looking weak. But above everything else, they prioritize results. In this case, the administration ended up with results, at least so far, and so it works out.
Kim, you look like you're knitting your brow.
No, I mean, I just wonder, though, at what cost? Again, I mean, this should have been a no-brainer at the beginning. This man, Gaddafi, had killed more civilians in the world than any other man other than Osama bin Laden. He was an international terrorist. And when this came about, this could have been done, and he was on the ropes. This potentially could have been over in weeks, at a great saving of lost life in Libya, at least. And instead, there was hemming and hawing, and I think this exposed a lot of weaknesses. It exposed weaknesses within NATO. It certainly begs the question about America and its use of power in the world. Invited a lot of backlash from Congress, which we had to deal with here. And so I'm not necessarily sure it was a very big victory.
Juan?
You're not sure it was a big victory?
Well, in the end.
In the end, it was clearly a victory.
Yes, but,
I mean, the United States
it could have been a better
eliminated.
one.
It could have been better, you think, if the United States had put troops in?
No, but if we had led from the front, if we had been more forceful, we had to be dragged into this, basically, by the Europeans. The president was very slow to come around to this cause.
I don't think so. I think that the president was slow to say we were going to put American troops on the ground, and there was certainly no political support for that here in the United States. And I think there would have been consequences to putting troops on the ground in another Muslim country, given that we had a presence in Iraq, Afghanistan, troubles with the Pakistanis. So I think that he was able to manage this in the best way possible. Now, the question is, and I think you're exactly right, it exposed major flaws in terms of NATO, and it was the U.S. intelligence and ultimately U.S. military armaments that carried the day for the rebels. So the U.S. was engaged in another war, but I think it was done in such a way as to not harm our relationships in the Middle East, and that's critical.
Right.
I just had a couple of thoughts about this. It's not yet clear that this concept of leading from behind is a policy or whether it was just a practice that was applied in this case, because you have to ask the question, when it comes to Syria, are we leading from behind? Are we leading at all? Similarly with Iran, it doesn't appear that the effort to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is succeeding, except by virtue of their own technical stumbles and whatever efforts are being made, you know, to mess their computer systems up and sabotage their so, you know, I think there's a lot to be seen here.
We're out of time, but let me just ask you real quickly, Britt. You hear all this talk about we should have an investigation, war crimes, the killing of Gaddafi. You offended by the way Gaddafi ended?
Well, it does look like they captured him and they just decided to kill him, which isn't pretty, but I don't think the world is going to mourn him for very long, and I think all of this remains the fodder for the far left in various quarters, and you know, if there's an investigation, so what?
And on that note, we have to take a break here, but when we come back, the debate show, the Republican field isn't afraid to mix it up, but now the candidates look to hit the campaign trail hard. 2012 politics, next.